Welcome back. Tonight's story is about a woman who held a hospital badge for 19 years, watched her mother-in-law parade a paternity test at every family dinner, and quietly pulled the original chain of custody log the week before her son walked across a graduation stage. Pour the coffee. Stay close. My mother-in-law forged the paternity of my newborn 19 years ago. Next Saturday, at my son's graduation, the truth walks in with me. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I am 47. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I have worked in the labor and delivery records department of the same hospital for 21 years, which means I have spent 2 decades a hallway away from the room where my son was born, and a filing cabinet away from the lie that built our marriage. The envelope came on a Tuesday in April. Cream-colored, heavy stock, my son Theo's name in dark blue ink. A graduation invitation from his university. I sat at the kitchen counter with the morning still smelling like burnt toast and cold coffee, and I felt the radiator click on under the window the way it does in old Charleston houses. I read his name 3 times. I read the date. And then I did something I had not done in 19 years. I walked into the spare room, pulled out a shoebox from the top shelf of the closet, and took down the photocopy of the paternity test my mother-in-law, Diane Whitfield, mailed to every relative when Theo was 6 weeks old. I had carried that paper through 3 moves, 2 custody scares, and 1 near divorce, and never once looked at the signatures on the bottom. That night, I looked, and I knew, the way a records clerk knows, that the handwriting on that page had never sat in our hospital. If your gut already tells you what is coming, tell me in the comments. I want to see how many of us saw it from a mile away. I grew up in a house on Trad Street with peeling green shutters and a mother who ironed the dish towels. We were the family you saw at the 8 a.m. service and assumed had money. We did not. My father sold insurance and drank Old Crow out of a coffee mug on Saturdays. My mother taught piano in the front room. We had the kind of polished poverty that smells like lemon furniture polish on the outside and bounced checks on the inside. I was raised on 2 phrases, smile through it, and do not embarrass us. Those 2 sentences shaped everything that came later, including the night my son was born. I met Daniel Whitfield in my junior year at the College of Charleston. He was tall, kind in a quiet, absent way, and he had a mother. Diane Whitfield was the sort of woman who wore real pearls to a barbecue and corrected the waiter's posture. She owned a small chain of dance studios across the Lowcountry, and she made it clear from our first dinner that no woman would ever be quite enough for her only son. She watched me eat. She counted my bites. She told Daniel in front of me that my hips were narrow and that narrow-hipped girls had a difficult time with childbirth. I laughed because I was 22 and trained to smile through it. Daniel laughed because he had been smiling through it his whole life. We married at 24 in a small church off East Bay. Diane wore white, not cream, not blush, white, and a hat with a veil. My own mother sat in the second row and pretended not to notice. At the reception, Diane gave a toast that ended with the line, "My son deserves the world, and I intend to make sure he gets it." People laughed. I did not. Something in my chest pulled tight and stayed tight for 19 years. I got pregnant in our 3rd year of marriage. Diane arrived at our apartment that same week with a quilted bag full of folic acid, a leather-bound pregnancy journal, and a small framed photograph of Daniel at 6 years old that she set on our mantel without asking. From that day forward, she was at every appointment, every single one. The first ultrasound, the gender reveal, the glucose test, the 3rd trimester check-ins. She sat in the waiting room with her purse on her lap and a notebook open and a pen moving. She wrote things down. I did not know what she was writing. I assumed it was grandmother nesting. I now know it was a timeline. 2 warning signs. I will tell you them now, and you will remember them later. First warning. At my baby shower, Diane stood up uninvited and asked everyone in the room when Daniel and I had, quote, become serious. She did not say intimate. She said serious, with air quotes. My cousin Marlene laughed nervously. My mother went to the kitchen. Second warning. At 34 weeks, I had a small bleed and went to the hospital alone because Daniel was in Atlanta on business. Diane arrived before I did. She had a hospital pass already clipped to her blouse. When I asked the charge nurse how my mother-in-law had a pass before I had even checked in, the nurse said, "She has been donating to the foundation for years, sweetheart. They do that for the big donors." I should have understood then. I did not. I was 27 and grateful that someone was there. I held her hand. She wrote in her notebook, "Theo was born on a Sunday in October at 2:14 in the morning. The room smelled like rubbing alcohol and that strange iron scent of new life." Diane was in the room. My mother was not. Daniel held the camera. The cord was cut. Theo cried twice and went quiet, and then a tall man in pale blue scrubs came in with a small paper packet. He said the words, "Paternity confirmation, optional protocol per donor request." I was so tired I thought he had said maternity. I signed where Daniel told me to sign. Daniel did not look at me when he handed me the pen. That is the moment the rot started growing. I just did not know which wall it lived inside yet. 6 weeks later, the envelopes arrived. Every aunt, every uncle, my own mother, 3 pastors, Daniel's college roommate. Diane had mailed copies of a paternity test with my name, Theo's name, Daniel's name, and a result that read, "Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Attached was a typed letter in her elegant cursive font. It read, "Our family deserves to know the truth before a child is raised under a false name. With love and clarity, Diane." My mother drove to my apartment with the letter in her hand and stood in my doorway shaking. Daniel was at work. I was holding Theo. I read the page. I read it again. The room did not spin. I went very, very still. Because I knew, even then, that something was wrong with the document in a way I could not yet name. The hospital seal was on the wrong corner. The reference number had only 6 digits. Our system used 8, but I was 27 years old, postpartum, alone in the room, and the entire extended family had already read it. Daniel came home that night. I held the letter up. He looked at the floor. He said, "My mother just wants to be sure." He said, "If it is mine, the test will say so when we redo it." He said, "We will get through this." He did not say, "I believe you." He never said that. We did not redo the test. Diane refused. She said the family had already seen the result and a retest would be, quote, "theatrical." Daniel let it sit. The aunts stopped calling. My mother sent me a card every Sunday for a year that just said, "I know who he is." 3 church ladies crossed the street when they saw me coming. I stopped going to the 8 a.m. service. I started working full-time in records at the hospital because they offered tuition help and because deep down I wanted to be near the cabinets. I never confronted Diane. I never raised my voice. I sat through 10 Thanksgivings, 11 Christmases, 19 of her birthday lunches at the Cypress Room, and I watched her hold Theo on her lap and call him her miracle and her doubt in the same sentence. Daniel and I shared a bed and a mortgage and a polite silence. Theo grew up tall and dark-eyed and obviously his father's son. Diane would touch his chin at every gathering and say, "The Whitfield jaw is unmistakable," in a voice that made everyone laugh nervously and no one disagree. I smiled. I poured the sweet tea. I waited. If you have ever had a family member turn cruelty into a game and dress it up as family love, drop a 1 in the comments. I want to know I am not alone in this. Here is what no one understood. I had access, not just to the hospital. I had access to the labor and delivery archives going back to 1979. I knew where the chain of custody logs were kept. I knew that every paternity test ordered through our facility required 2 signatures, the ordering physician and the witnessing nurse, and that those signatures were logged in a leather-bound ledger that lived in a fireproof cabinet on the 3rd floor of the records annex. I had walked past that cabinet 1,000 times. I had never opened it. I had told myself year after year that opening it would break something inside our marriage I could not put back together. I think the truth is simpler. I was afraid that if I looked and found nothing, I would have to keep living the life Diane had written for me. So I did not look. For 19 years, I did not look. Daniel and I rebuilt, slowly, in the strange way couples do when neither of them tells the truth. He stopped traveling. He took Theo fishing on Saturdays. He learned to bake bread on Sundays in a way I think he hoped would apologize for what he never said out loud. We moved out of Charleston proper to a smaller house on John's Island with a screened porch and a kitchen clock that ticked too loudly. I planted gardenias along the back fence. I adopted a one-eyed beagle named Captain from a shelter in West Ashley. Theo grew up watching his father knead dough and his mother prune flowers, and he turned into a quiet, observant, gentle young man who got into Clemson on a partial scholarship to study mechanical engineering. The day he left for school, I sat on the porch with Captain on my lap and Daniel inside making coffee, and I let myself feel a thing I had not felt since 2007. I felt anger. Not hot, cold, the kind of cold that sits in your stomach for a week and then becomes a plan. Theo did well at Clemson. He called every Sunday. He came home for the holidays with a girlfriend named Priya, kind and sharp and from Atlanta, and Diane treated her exactly the way she had treated me, which is to say, like a project. Priya did not smile through it. Priya watched Diane the way I had watched her for 19 years. And one Christmas Eve in our kitchen, Priya looked at me over a glass of cider and said quietly, "Has anyone ever asked her to prove the paper?" I did not answer. I poured her another glass, but I went upstairs that night and pulled the photocopy out of the shoebox and stared at the signatures until my eyes hurt. The graduation invitation arrived in April. The ceremony was in May. I had 4 weeks. On a Wednesday during my lunch break, I walked up to the 3rd floor of the records annex with a paper coffee cup in my hand and a clearance badge that had been valid for 21 years, and I opened the fireproof cabinet for the first time. I pulled the ledger marked October 2006. I turned to the night of Theo's birth. There were 2 paternity tests logged that week. One belonged to a family named Brennan. The other was logged at 4:47 a.m. on a Sunday. The mother's name was Eleanor Marsh Whitfield. The ordering physician's signature was a tight, looping cursive. The witnessing nurse signed in a hard, slanted print with a tail on the Y. I knew both signatures. I had seen them every day for 2 decades. Dr. Andrew Pellman, Nurse Geraldine Hodge. I pulled the photocopy out of my purse. The signatures on Diane's document were not theirs, not even close. The ordering physician on her copy was signed Dr. M. Hollister. We had never had a Dr. Hollister at our hospital. Not in 2006, not ever. I sat down on the floor of the records annex with my back against the cabinet, and I cried for the first time in 19 years, quietly, with my hand over my mouth, because the document Diane had mailed to 37 people about my child had been fabricated outside of any hospital, and I had been carrying it in a shoebox for almost 2 decades like a verdict. The next morning, I drove to a private lab in Mount Pleasant. I paid $419 in cash. I had cheek swabs from Daniel's old razor and Theo's old retainer case, which I had kept in a drawer the way mothers keep things. I told the technician I needed a rush. She looked at me and said, "Family thing, ma'am." I said, "You could call it that." The results came back in 9 days. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. Daniel was Theo's father. He had always been Theo's father. He had been Theo's father for 19 years and 4 months and 11 days while his own mother told a different story. I did not tell Daniel. I did not tell Theo. I took the new test and the original ledger photocopy and Diane's old letter, and I put them all in a single manila folder, and I drove to the Cypress Room on a Friday at noon, where Diane ate lunch every Friday at noon for 40 years. She was at the corner table in her cream blouse and her real pearls, with a glass of unsweetened tea and a half-eaten chicken salad in front of her. She saw me walk in, and her face did the small flicker it always did, the half-second of surprise before the warm hostess smile clicked on. She said, "Eleanor, sweetheart, what a surprise." I sat down across from her. I did not take off my coat. I put the folder on the table between us. I said, "Diane, I want to talk about Theo's graduation next Saturday." She said, "Of course, dear. I have already ordered a corsage." I opened the folder. I slid the original chain of custody log across the table first. I tapped the signatures. I said, These are the people who would have signed Theo's paternity test if you had ever ordered one. Then I slid the letter she had mailed in 2006. I said, "This signature is from a doctor who never worked at our hospital." Then I slid the new test. I said, "Theo is Daniel's son. He has always been Daniel's son. You knew that the day you mailed those envelopes. You just did not want me to be the one who gave him to you." Her hand went to her pearls, the same hand that had touched Theo's chin at every gathering for 19 years and said, "The Whitfield jaw is unmistakable." I leaned forward. I said the line I had been saving since the night a tall man in pale blue scrubs came into my hospital room at 2:14 in the morning and called it optional protocol per donor request. I said, "You wanted to know the truth before a child was raised under a false name. The child was raised under a false name. The name was Whitfield, and you wrote it." She did not speak. She set down her fork. A small piece of chicken salad fell onto the white cloth. I closed the folder. I said, "I am not bringing this to the graduation. I am not bringing this to Daniel. I am leaving it here on this table, and you will not sit in the front row next Saturday. You will sit at the back. You will not give a toast. You will not touch his chin. And on Sunday morning, you will mail a letter to every relative who got the first one, in your own handwriting, telling them what you did. If you do not, I will. I have copies. I have had copies for 19 years. I just needed a Friday." I stood up, I left the folder. I walked out into the white Charleston sun and got into my car and sat with my hands on the wheel for a long, long minute. I did not cry. I did not shake. I drove home. If you have stayed with me until now, thank you. Tell me in the comments what part of the story stayed with you the most. I read every one. On the drive home down Maybank Highway, with the marsh on my left and the late spring light coming in low and gold across the windshield, I talked to the 27-year-old girl I used to be. The girl in the hospital bed at 2:14 in the morning, signing a paper she did not read because a tall man in pale blue scrubs called it optional. I told her she was not stupid. I told her she was tired and trusting and 27, and that the woman in the room with the notebook had been planning that page for months. I told her that being doubted by a broken woman is not the same as being unworthy of belief. I told her that she would carry a shoebox for 19 years, and one day she would open it on a Tuesday in April and become the kind of woman who walks into a cypress room at noon and lays the truth on a white tablecloth without raising her voice. I told her, "You do not have to smile through it anymore." Diane sent the letters. She sat at the back. She did not touch his chin. Theo walked across the stage in a navy gown and tossed his cap in the air, and Daniel reached for my hand in the crowd, and for the first time in 19 years, I held his hand back without flinching. I am 47. I still work in records. The shoebox is empty now.